Mehdi Hasan is a US-based journalist and broadcaster who knows how to do a killer interview. Most recently, those interviews were hosted on MSNBC, including a very punchy one with former Israeli ambassador Mark Regev. We analysed that on this show. But in somewhat mysterious circumstances, his show was taken off air. Well, you'll be pleased to hear he's back.
What? You thought I was gone? Oh no, you can't get rid of me that easily. I'm back with a whole new media company, in fact, my own. We're calling it Zeteo, the ancient Greek word that goes back to Socrates and Plato, which means to seek out, to inquire, to get to the truth. And that is the guiding principle behind my new media venture. Zeteo will bring you hard-hitting interviews and unsparing analysis that you won't find elsewhere. Shows, podcasts, op-eds, newsletters. We have it all. And it's not just me. I've been busy, a la Nick Fury, assembling an Avengers-style team of contributors, the kind of big names from media, activism, and Hollywood that will blow your mind.
And joining me now from Washington, D.C. is Mehdi Hasan.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
Firstly, can you tell us about this new platform? And can you explain the name to me? Where did you get Zeteo from?
It comes from ancient Greece. It comes from the time of Plato and Socrates, and it refers to seeking out, inquiring, challenging, looking for the truth. And I thought that would be an appropriate name for a new media organization in an era where the truth is hidden from us. We have a bunch of serial gaslighters and grifters and con men and liars, basically running the show on both sides of the Atlantic. And therefore, I thought the name was rather appropriate for what is a new media company, Michael. We're going to be doing a lot of things. We're going to be doing streaming shows. We're going to be doing podcasts. We're going to be doing video essays, op-eds, newsletters. I've got to do the shameless plug. Folks can sign up at zeteonews.com, Z-E-T-E-O news.com. And I love saying it on here because in America I have to say Z-E-T-E-O news.com. So at least I can remember how Z is supposed to be said. But I'm inspired by you guys, actually, and many of you guys in the independent space who have done so well challenging, quote unquote, mainstream media, corporate-owned media, getting other platforms out to voices we need to hear from. And so thank you to you guys at Novara.
Well, it's very, very meaningful. Thank you so much for saying that. Obviously, we've been big fans of your interviewing style. We've been, in fact, sort of showing a bunch of your interviews and reacting to them. So I suppose my question for you, are you concerned, and we have the same sort of issues here, where there is, to some degree, a trade-off between freedom to say whatever you want and then access to people with power? Because obviously one of the great roles you've been able to have on MSNBC and on other mainstream platforms is that you can get Mark Regev or other Israeli officials to talk to you. Are you worried that sort of, you know, the people you give tougher interviews to, so the right-wingers or the supporters of autocratic regimes, do you think they're going to be less likely to come on an independent media show than they were when it was mainstream?
I wouldn't say I'm worried. I would say I acknowledge the risk and the challenge and the uncertainty. It will be very interesting to see what happens when we do our main launch. Because right now, Michael, just to be clear to your viewers in the UK in particular, we did a soft launch this week. So we kind of launched the site. We're going to be doing newsletters right now for everyone, free and paid. But come April, we're going to roll out actual shows. And most of that stuff will go behind a paywall for the paid subscribers. And you're right, in come April, will we struggle to get guests? I hope to prove everyone wrong, but it's clearly a challenge. But I would say this to you, Michael, the challenge between access and freedom isn't just a kind of independent alternative platform issue. It's also an issue of, even when I was at MSNBC, I was saying what I wanted to say. I was slightly more provocative, I think it's fair to say, than some of the other hosts on cable news. And there was an issue there. Would not just Republicans, would Democrats, would establishment Democrats come on the show and get grilled by me? Because, you know, MSNBC tends not to be a place where establishment Democrats are used to being grilled, I think it's fair to say. And as for right-wingers, none of them would come on MSNBC anyways, because American cable news has become so partisan that people retreat to their, comfort zones. So the challenge has always been there. It's clearly going to be bigger now I'm going it alone. But by the way, I should be clear, I'm not actually going it alone. I'm launching now on my own. But the whole point of Zeteo and why I didn't call it the Mehdi Hasan network, like the Tucker Carlson network, is because it is a platform for more people than just me. We're going to roll out a list of pretty big name contributors, many of whom your viewers and listeners will know. We're going to be rolling them out in April. So it is me and a team of people contributing. And I hope between us, we'll get some great guests and great people and great contacts. But look, you look at people like, I'm not a fan of his, but Joe Rogan. I'm not a fan of his, but Ben Shapiro. People who have made their names in the independent space, they get sometimes bigger guests than quote unquote corporate media. So I think people will go where the audience is, where the challenge is. A lot of right wingers like to have a argument. And you know me, I like to have an argument. I wrote a book about winning arguments, another shameless plug, which is out in paperback this week. So I hope the arguments continue, but you're right. It is going to be an interesting challenge to see what the people in power do.
I presume you'll be covering a lot on the American elections this year, inevitably. Tell me about that. I mean, obviously, at the moment, there's a big debate about Joe Biden and Gaza. You've got these two, deeply problematic options. On the one side, you've got Donald Trump. Yes. On the other side, you've got Joe Biden, who's been very, very supportive of Israel. I would say unconditionally supportive of Israel in their genocidal war on Gaza. How are you going to approach that?
So this is one of the big editorial challenges for Zeteo, because we want to have as broad a presence as possible on the center left, far left, liberal, progressive part of the spectrum. And I've been someone who throughout my career has been very careful to try and keep all lines of communication open to different parts of the progressive wings of American and British politics. I worked at Al Jazeera English, as you know, which has a different editorial bent, to The Intercept, which has a very different editorial bent, to MSNBC. And along the way, I appreciate the fact that I've picked up a lot of followers and viewers and readers who are from different parts of the left. So, for example, right now, I know that we've had thousands and thousands of subscribers in the first couple of days of the launch of Zeteo. And I know that many of them will be blue no matter who, Biden Democrats who are rightly concerned about the return of Donald Trump. But I know there's also going to be a lot of people in there who are maybe the Michigan uncommitted folks who are, we cannot vote for Joe Biden, he's complicit in a genocide. So it'll be interesting to see, and I can't pretend to you that I have the answer right now. It'll be interesting to see how we navigate that and how we do content which is truthful, which is principled, which is morally consistent, but which will be playing to different audiences on the left. But the left, as you know, Michael, you've been doing this in the independent space longer than me. It's very different to the right. The right is much more monolithic. You can argue about Trump versus never Trump, Nikki Haley. But in terms of demographics, in terms of what gets them worked up, wokeism, culture wars, it's pretty easy for the Ben Shapiros and Barry Weisses and Tucker Carlsons to dish up red meat content that gets them easy subscribers. I think on the left, it's going to be much more of a challenge covering America in particular in an election year, where, as I say, people are rightly concerned that in a two-party choice, you've got to reject Donald Trump, the fascist. But in a two-party choice, can you really bring yourself to vote for either of them, given what Joe Biden is unconditionally doing on behalf of the genocidal Israeli government, as you say?
And concretely on the Gaza issue, I want to know where you sort of stand in your opinions on this, because I know some experts, so Rashid Khalidi, among them, one of the very sort of high-profile experts on the Palestine issue, has said that he believes that Biden has been even worse than Trump when it comes to Israel-Palestine. Where do you sort of stand on that question?
It's this is one of the thorniest questions of our time when it comes to the left, Biden, Trump, and Gaza. Look, all right, this is a careful one to navigate, because this is not some abstract issue, is it, Michael? There are people who are really hurting. There are people here in America, Arab Americans, Palestinian Americans, who say, we cannot vote for Joe Biden. We've lost not 10, not 20, not 30, 40, 50, 60 members of our family in Gaza. And of course, how could anyone say to that person, you should vote like this? That's just a given. What Biden has done is unprecedented in the sense of what Israel has done is unprecedented and America has backed it. So in that sense, what he's done is unprecedented. Again, unfortunately, we live in a two-party system. And we have to understand that if it's not Biden, then it's Trump. If it's not Biden, it's Cornel West or Marianne Williamson. If it's not Biden, it's Donald Trump. And I would like, I've met people who claim, and I believe wrongly claim, that if Donald Trump was president, things wouldn't be as bad right now. That's nonsense. You don't have to normalize or minimize Donald Trump's awfulness in order to criticize Joe Biden. I can say very happily that Joe Biden is complicit in an awful genocide. And in a perfect world, he would be politically punished because we have many more choices. But the reality is Donald Trump, as president of the United States, was horrifically pro-Israel. In fact, you could argue, as Rashid Khalid does, that Biden is the most pro-Israeli president of our lifetimes. But guess who the most pro-Israeli president before Joe Biden was? Donald Trump. Right? Donald Trump moved the embassy to Jerusalem. Donald Trump has a settlement. Many people don't know this, in the Golan Heights in occupied Syria, named after him. Right? Donald Trump is the only American president who has an illegal settlement named after him. That's how much the far right in Israel love him. In fact, you'd have to take my word for it. Itamar Ben-Gvir, perhaps the worst member of Netanyahu's government, who this week was celebrating the Flower Massacre in northern Gaza. He has said on the record that if Donald Trump was in office, we would have much more freedom to do what we want to do. Those are not my words. Those are Ben-Gvir's words. So when I say Donald Trump would be worse for the Palestinians than even Joe Biden, I'm not just saying that as a kind of opinion. I'm saying that's what the Israelis believe. Now, and this is what I say to people. Nobody's telling you to vote for Joe Biden. I wouldn't tell people how to vote. What I would say is bear in mind the fact that Netanyahu and Ben-Gvir are waiting for a Trump presidency. There's no debate about that. So that's an important point to bear in mind. I get it. People are hurting. People are furious at Joe Biden. But the alternative is Donald Trump or Nikki Haley. Let's say Donald Trump falls under a bus tomorrow, has a heart attack, disappears from the planet Earth, pulls out of the race, whatever it is. Nikki Haley is the Republican alternative to Joe Biden. She has said, finish the job. Get the people out of Gaza. She has come out for ethnic cleansing, which even Joe Biden, for all his sins on this issue, has not. So it's a really tricky one, Michael, because now if you clip this, people will say, oh, Mehdi Hasan saying Biden's not that bad. Vote. No, I'm saying Biden is awful on Gaza. I'm just saying the fact that he's awful on Gaza doesn't mean that Trump wouldn't be much worse.
I want to bring your attention back to the UK, obviously where you cut your teeth. George Galloway has just been elected in the Rochdale by-election, the third time he has campaigned against Labour and won. Of course, he has campaigned against Labour and not won a few times as well. He's principally run this campaign on that issue of Gaza. I wanted to know your thoughts on George Galloway, if you ever sort of came across him in your time as a political journalist in the UK.
It's a couple of things. One is my understanding, and obviously I'm not as connected to this issue as you are, but just from following on social media, my understanding is that Galloway did run a very Gaza-focused campaign. But I did see that he was doing that clever thing where he was targeting different constituencies, different groups in different ways, which all politicians do, to be fair, where he's putting out kind of quite right-wing letters about gender wars and gender identity and trust me on this issue and playing to people's kind of reactionary impulses, but he's also putting out letters to Muslim community with Assalamu alaikum and stand for the Muslim Ummah in Gaza. George Galloway is a deeply cynical figure. He has been around on the scene for many, many years. I think he's gotten worse over the years. He's not a big fan of mine. I'm not a big fan of his. I wrote a piece for The Guardian, Michael, years ago when he was running in, was it Bradford West? I can't remember which Bradford constituency.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, look, British Muslims cannot be a one-issue community, right? We care about foreign policy. We also have to care about domestic policy. Now, that does ring a little bit hollow today when what's happening in Gaza is way more than just a foreign policy issue. It is obviously a plausible genocide, to quote the International Court of Justice, and both British political mainstream parties have done such a bad job on Gaza that, of course, it opens the way for someone like Galloway. And I don't blame anyone in Rochdale who voted for Galloway because they're angry at the main parties. It's totally understandable. Galloway winning is the fault of the main parties for not being able to take a principled, engaged stance on the biggest moral policy issue of our time. I go back years with Galloway. I have a story. I don't know if I've ever told this story, but many years ago, I was a young researcher at ITV News. I think this was January 2022, I want to say. It was when Guantanamo Bay was opened up, Michael. You were probably in primary school. So
2002.
I was a 20... Sorry?
2002. I think you said 2022. 2002. Or you were 22.
January 2002. That's how old I am. I can't even think of the date go back that far. And I was a 23-year-old researcher at Jonathan Dimbleby show at LWT, the Sunday show. And we had a debate between George Galloway and Andrew Neil on Guantanamo. And I remember booking Galloway, and I was a big fan, young lefty. George Galloway, yeah, let's get him on. He was such a great debater. He is a great debater. And some audience member accused him of taking money from Saddam Hussein. And he went nuts. And then he blamed me and said I'd set him up with the audience member. I'm this young researcher. And he's calling me out on set in front of like my bosses and Jonathan Dimbleby. And then he threatens to sue LW. We get the classic legal letter from Galloway, which I don't think went anywhere at the time. I mean, I didn't get fired. But that's my earliest professional memory of dealing with George Galloway. But, on a serious point, you look at something, a lot of the people on the Palestine issue, Michael, not a lot, okay, a section of the left on the Palestine issue is very strong, eloquently, rhetorically on Palestine, and Galloway is one of them. My problem is I want people to be consistent on human rights, not just on the right, but on the left. And when it came to the Syria conflict, for example, I think Galloway was on the wrong side in terms of supporting what Assad was doing. And don't forget, Assad starved and killed a lot of Palestinians in places like Yarmouk, the refugee camp in Syria. And some of us have longer memories. So we remember that and say, well, hold on, you're now very pro-Palestinian, pro-Arab. What about when Assad was killing tens of thousands of people?
Let's talk more generally about UK politics. So you've got your general election coming up in the United States. We've got ours. We don't quite know when it's going to be, but it's supposed to be this year. It could be next January. How do you see that going? I mean, what's your views, for example, on Keir Starmer's leadership of the Labour Party?
Keir Starmer, wow. I wanted to be positive about Keir Starmer, but everything I see, and maybe this is, I'm far away. I'm seeing a lot of it online. It's bad. Like, not just Gaza bad, but bad across the board, bad on the environment. Like I'm someone who's very critical of Tony Blair, Michael. I've spent much of my career criticizing, opposing what Tony Blair did as Prime Minister and Labour leader. And yet, let's go back further than 2002, in 1997, I was 17 years old. I missed out on the May election by a few months, wasn't able to vote, and I wanted to vote Labour in that landslide. I was very excited about Tony Blair. I hated the Tories. And I was a fan of Labour coming in, and people move to the right as they get older. I feel like I moved to the left. I was more right wing when I was a teenager. I was more centrist. And Blair disappointed us, right? On the domestic front, but also obviously Iraq, post 9/11, horrific crimes. But when you compare Starmer now to Blair then, Blair offered a far more radical, ambitious agenda. And it wasn't that radical ambitious. It was that one little pledge card. And did more radical, ambitious things like healthcare spending, which he and Brown did increase. And Starmer seems to want to do at a moment where Starmer seems to have a much easier path to victory than even Blair had. So I find the lack of ambition, the cautiousness, the centrism, the playing to the right-wing gallery, the disowning of any left-wing views he pretended to have when he ran for leader or served under Corbyn. I find that in a way worse than Blair in 97. And Owen Jones, our good friend, made this point yesterday on social media. He's going to win, but he's not going to win with any enthusiasm. And he hasn't really got a mandate for any kind of major change that he needs to do in the UK.